Hey, I'm Alex at Bike Rehab. Today in the workshop, I'm fitting a dual battery setup to this Orbea Wild to massively increase the range. Here's the range with just its 625 watt hour main battery in, and then here is the range after the dual battery setup has been fitted with an additional 400 watt hours. We all know that e-bike range is very subjective, and I doubt this bike will see 147 miles of range, but still, with over 1,000 watt hours, should be pretty capable in the hills now. Here are all the parts that are required to change this bike from a single battery setup to the dual battery setup. There is an additional part just there, which is a water bottle holder that we're not going to be fitting at this point. I'm going to put a link to all the parts required in the description below, because they're actually quite difficult to source the part codes to do this conversion, so they'll be down below so you can track them down. Basically, the kit has some sections to attach the battery, a Y-shaped connector right there to allow the dual battery setup. You'll need a separate battery. In this case, it's a 400 watt hour BOSCH battery, and you need an ABUS locking mechanism to be able to attach the battery. And here's the tech diagram of the installation. So I'm starting with the locking mechanism at the top section of the battery. These are the components that we're going to need to install. On the Orbea Wild, there's a small blanking plate that we need to access. So first of all, we take off the battery before we do any work. The two screws underneath are T15s, which access the little blanking plate that's currently there. This upper section of the battery mount is a self-adhesive section of foam, followed by the plastic backing plate, the ABUS lock section there, and then there's a large metal spacer that sits between the frame and the mount, which is secured with some nuts and some Allen key bolts there. Here's the locking mechanism in situ. It's not been fully torqued down yet, as we need to adjust it to be the length of the battery, so I'm just going to leave it a sort of finger tight at the moment. Next, I'm removing the lower blanking plate, which was a water bottle holder, to access the mounting block for the lower battery mount. Here are the components for the lower battery mount. There's the mount itself, a cable with the battery connector on, and then its plastic housing. And they all clip together quite simply there, and then this section bolts on through the two holes that are in the frame. The hardware does come with anti-rotation washers, but I'm just popping a bit of Loctite 248 thread lock on there just to make sure that nothing has a chance to rattle loose. This lower battery mount is going to be static, so once you're happy with the position, it can just be torqued up to where it needs to be. Here's the Powerpack 400 that's going to be fitted. Just doing a test fit at the moment to see the length of the battery, making some adjustments to the upper battery mount to make sure that everything's in line before it's all torqued up. Bosch do make a specific tool to get this length, but it's pretty straightforward just to do it with the length of the actual battery. Now that I'm happy it's in the right place, that can be torqued up, again using some thread lock. Then the plastic covers for the locking mechanism has got a couple of little screws that can be popped in there to hold it all in place. Before doing our final test, here it goes, the battery's in. That's the battery fitted. Now we'll remove it and we'll start mounting the cables to the motor. Firstly, I'm taking the motor shield off. So there's a couple of bolts on the front, a couple of screws that come across. Sometimes easiest to take the rear wheel out, take the chain off, get all those sort of side of things out of the way to access these, and sometimes they can be left in situ. There's the big T40 bolts which hold the motor in, which we're loosening now just to drop the whole motor out so we can access all the ports. To make life easier, I find it best to have a stool or a workbench or something underneath so you can drop the motor down without having to disconnect everything. Here's what it looks like inside. So the next part that we need to fit is the Y-shaped wiring harness, which attaches the 2 batteries to the motor. The lead from the second battery needs to go into the frame where the motor sits, and on the Orbea it has a little blanking plate that can be removed, so it's really tidy to put the cable through down into the motor. Fitting the wiring harness is mega simple. You just remove the existing battery mount and attach it to the Y-shaped connector. One battery goes into one section of the connector, and then the Y-shaped lead goes into the motor. Simple as that. The main problem that you're going to get is that you've now got a longer cable to find a home for, and also 2 connector blocks which you've got to try and find somewhere in the already crammed motor space. So it takes a little bit of time to find a good setup, but once you've found somewhere for all those cables to go, you can then start to reinstall the motor. Because of the frame shape, I found that the motor had to go in with the front slid in first, and the 2 front bolts can be popped in first, and then the middle, and then the rear section in there. Whilst it's going in, it is a little bit tight with the cable, so you do have to make sure that nothing gets pinched. So just take a little bit of time on that one, but it slid in quite nicely. To finish up, it's just a case of putting any plastic trims back on, reinstalling the rear wheel and the chain if those have been removed, and there's a hidden little zip tie which really nicely holds the cable from the battery down. So here it is, ready for a test. Here I've put both batteries in, the main downtree battery, its cover, and also the new secondary battery. Cool, so here's the result. There's the range with just the single downtree battery in, 77 miles in eco apparently. And then if we pop the secondary 400 watt-hour battery in, let's see what it does to the range. Ooh, it smashes it up to a claimed 147 miles, which obviously do not believe, but yeah, definitely a massive range bike now. Let's take it for a little test spin. Out on the street, the bike feels great. The additional weight doesn't seem to really bother the bike. So I was a little bit skeptical of adding loads more weight to an already quite heavy bike, but to be honest, you don't really feel it. So I think the additional range is such a good feature to be able to have with this. It would feel very tempted to be able to just ride this bike in turbo the whole time, as you knew you'd have the range to get you home even if you were out for a good few hours. But yeah, everything's gone well, bike's working nice, awesome upgrade. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.